Welcome, everyone. Simcoe County Kairos is honored to bring you this year's Ecumenical Good Friday Walk for Justice, both on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. We are a local group of volunteers inspired by the work of KAIROS Canada, a national social justice movement that unites the work of many churches and people of faith or conscience who work together on ecological justice and on human rights. Before COVID, we would have gathered together on the shores of Kempenfelt Bay on Lake Simcoe. But this year, we gather virtually to reflect on the parallels between the suffering and death of Jesus of Nazareth and the suffering of many people in our community, people who go mostly unnoticed and whose numbers have grown during the pandemic. Specifically, those who have suffered and died due to the opioid crisis, those who are experiencing homelessness, temporary foreign workers who are vulnerable and upon whom we rely for our food supply, and those service workers who are often racialized, working in low-income jobs and cannot say no to work. So through our reflections today, our songs and our prayers, we hope that you experience the Good Friday Walk for Justice as an opportunity to stand in solidarity with all members of the human family. Before we begin, let us acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live.
We in Barrie, Ontario, acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Watauga First Nation, as well as the historic Métis communities in our region. We also acknowledge that Simcoe, Muskoka is the home of many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people as part of an intricate nationhood that reaches across Turtle Island, also known as North America. We welcome the opportunity to work together toward new understandings and new relationships.
Hambanate kululi wetu, hambanate kululi wetu, hambanate kululi wetu, hambanate kululi wetu, kululi 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 wetu, kululi 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 wetu, kululi 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 wetu, kululi 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 wetu.
I would like to start with a reading from the Hebrew scriptures, Leviticus 19, verses 33 and 34. When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as you yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And I would like to follow up with a reflection from our colleague who is coordinating the Asia partnerships. On his recent visit with mission and service partners in Chennai, India, I decided to leave the hotel to take an evening walk after a hard day's work. Not from where I was staying, were many homeless people, all preparing for sleep on the streets for the night. I was shocked at the sheer numbers. Upon further inquiry, I discovered that most of them were migrant workers who had traveled from the rural areas to make money to support their families. Their life on the street is far from easy. These migrant workers are among the most vulnerable in the wake of the coronavirus in India and other Asian countries and other countries in the world. They have arguably suffered the worst of the pandemic's consequences. The ensuing economic crisis has made their future gravely unpredictable. They have lost their livelihoods practically overnight. Their condition is made worse by the exclusion from government assistance programs, their invisibility in the workforce, and the deepening social inequality. People have always migrated from one place to another for good and bad. Throughout the Bible, we read stories of people on the move. Abraham started a long journey out of Ur. Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt. The disciples scattered throughout the Roman Empire. The wise men traveled from the east to behold baby Jesus in a manger, and Paul departed on various missions by journeys. I would like us to think, that here in Canada, we have hundreds of thousands of migrant workers who come from different countries, from Latin America, from the Caribbean countries and Asia, to work as migrant workers under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And since the pandemic started last year, March 9, 2020, majority of these migrant workers, were made more vulnerable because of the exclusion, because of their very exclusion from the government services, benefits, and social economic packages. They do not count. And yet, we depended so much on them for the labor that they provide to make sure that we have, food to put on our tables, to care for our children and to care for our elderly, whether they are at home or in long-term care facilities. For so many years, we have heard stories of how these migrant workers have been abused, exploited, and treated, different from us. We've heard stories how vulnerable their lives are. And some of us, responded, built connections, and provided support. KAIROS, an ecumenical justice organization under the umbrella of the United Church of Canada, and with other 9 member churches across the country, have started to shift our programming to make sure that we provide support and accompaniment to the temporary foreign workers who are here in Canada, who are toiling our fields, who are caring for our children and our elderly. In this time of Lent, let us be mindful of these invisible people and make them visible. Let us be mindful that all throughout this time, they are cut off from their families. They cannot go home because their countries have shut down, their borders. And they cannot, socialize. Well, in as much as we are all under lockdown and we are, advised not to go out unnecessarily. But migrant workers suffer more because they are already isolated, and the pandemic has made them more isolated, has made them more invisible, has made them more vulnerable. Currently, KAIROS is with the support of the government of Canada under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, are reaching out to thousands of migrant workers in Ontario and in the Maritimes to provide them the support and services that they need, to facilitate them access to service delivery agencies, to provide them with emergency assistance like food, clothing, emergency housing, and other basic necessities. As we do this walk for justice, let us walk with migrant workers. Let us walk with them, thankful of the contributions they give to us, to our community, to the whole of the Canadian economy. Let us walk with them as they struggle, as they assert their rights, for equality, for better access, and to become permanent residents here in Canada. On this Lenten season, we are called to ponder on Jesus Christ's sufferings. And I want you, I want all of us, that when we ponder of the Holy Week of Jesus in Gethsemane, that we think of our brethren, of our brothers and sisters that are in the same situation and needing our support, needing our friendship, needing our relationship, needing our witness. Thank you.
You are holy, you show us the way. 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 You show us, show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way.
They were our instant heroes, people who put their own safety in jeopardy to respond to the needs of others. Our essential workers turned up day after day for work, caring for our elderly relatives, providing necessary services for the community, like ringing up our groceries and serving our food. Signs sprang up in front yards lauding these dedicated people. But when going to the polls, these are the ones who are last and least. Working most of these jobs for minimum wage, they are not only barely able to support a family, but they're not able to refuse work if they feel ill. If they get the sniffles, they can't isolate in the family camper in the driveway, because their driveway is full of cars, and they share living spaces out of economic necessity. And these workers are disproportionately racialized.
A headline in the Toronto Star for January 19th, 2021 blares, "The most asymmetrical recession in Canadian history. New analysis shows low-income workers were hammered by COVID-19, while high earners flourished." An analysis of data by CIBC shows people in temporary work, older workers, and low-wage workers were far more likely to have lost their jobs in 2020. More than half of the job losses last year were from people who had temporary work. 31% of unemployment is among people who are self-employed. And all job losses were among people who had lower than average wages. The wage gap is growing worse than it ever has, and a lot of it is because of the expanding gig economy, which features temporary self-employed workers in service jobs with low wages. While many people in customer-facing jobs such as retail or the hospitality industry lost their jobs because of COVID-related restrictions, and others in service-related gigs simply couldn't afford to stay home, many white-collar workers could keep doing their work, shifting their work to home. All the precarious work issues led to some of the horrendous outbreaks that we saw in long-term care homes. So that low wagers meant personal service workers needed to take multiple jobs to survive, and in many cases, they had to make do without paid sick leave.
These so-called heroes of the pandemic are those who became precariously employed and then precariously housed. These are the victims of the pandemic that really don't need a parade. What they need is a guaranteed basic income, equal opportunity in the job market, and paid sick leave, as well as access to government-funded childcare.
Let us pray. Jesus, you stand with those whom society considers last and least. We know this is where you call us to work for justice, but we often stand on the sidelines, clicking like on memes that celebrate people we have no intention of really helping live a full life in our midst. Help us to embrace the courage of the cross in advocating for people trapped in low-income jobs, who do not exercise the freedoms many of us take for granted. You who side with those whose lives are precarious are being crucified again today in the lives of those who suffer from injustice. We will follow you into the darkness.
You are freedom, you show us the way. 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 You show us, you show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way. You show us, you show us, you show us the way.
For many, they exist as a stereotype. Ill-clad, shuffling, hand held out, and a blank stare. But the homeless are as diverse as the Canadian population. Perhaps there is a disproportionate percentage whose mental health is not being properly attended to. But the homeless in our midst are our siblings, not strangers. And they are people who have been smashed by a system that benefits a few at the expense of the many. Today, an inflated housing market exacerbates the situation, while communities are often trapped in a new industry, that of building affordable housing. However, the notion of affordability does not take into consideration the complex system failure that has dropped these people onto the streets. As the wage gap widens, more and more people in our communities become precariously housed.
CTV News tells the story of Tim McFarlane, has been on the front lines in the fight against COVID-19. But since February of last year, he's also been living in his minivan after he became one of the roughly 235,000 Canadians who experience homelessness every year. I feel almost like royalty, in a way, said McFarlane. The thing I feel most bad about when I see someone sleeping on a sewer grate, I look at myself and I'm lucky. I'm extremely lucky to have a car. He moved to Toronto from upstate New York in 2007, married his wife 2 years after, bought a townhouse in Mississauga in 2014, and had 3 kids along the way. He was living the Canadian dream, but after separating from his wife, McFarlane couldn't keep up with the bills, causing debt to snowball. McFarlane isn't alone. There are countless untold stories of the hidden homeless. Someone working in a long-term care home during the day and staying in a shelter at night. You see all walks of life in the homeless system, said Tim Richter, president of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. On top of that, the pandemic has only made it harder, with no coffee shops or libraries to warm up in.
To a great extent, those who find themselves homeless for whatever reason in Simcoe County make their way either to Toronto or Barrie, in search of the help they need. Here, they are met with support services, but also with condemnation. Some residents of downtown would rather see these removed, so that their property values might be retained. Putting property or profit over people is a common method of crucifixion in our current context. Let us pray. Christ the healer, even you had nowhere to lay your head. You lived the life of the indigent poor, moving about from place to place, couch surfing. Help us to see you in the people who live on the street and those who are precariously housed. Help us to see you in the lineup at the food bank or the crowd around the library, rather than in sanitized depictions held hostage in churches. Help us to feel what you feel for us, boundless compassion and non-judgmental mercy. We know that through relationship we can build up a community of justice. So may we engage with these precious children of your heart in the way you would. We follow you in the shadow of the cross. Amen.
You are justice, you show us the way. 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 Show us, show us, 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 show us the way.
Good morning. As we gather today for a walk for justice, I'm here to speak to you about an issue that is deeply personal to me and that I am fiercely passionate about. I'm here today to speak to you about the pandemic within the pandemic. That pandemic is one that doesn't get talked about often, that gets pushed aside and gets silenced. That is the toxic drug crisis that is facing our city and our country. We already had a serious problem here in Barrie, but COVID-19 exacerbated the problem. Barrie's downtown has an 8.5 times higher rate of overdose than the provincial average. Since the start of the pandemic, the numbers of lives lost due to toxic drug poisonings in our community increased by 51%. That is due to several factors, including more people using alone, lack of access for addiction and mental health supports, and a more deadly drug supply. From January to September of 2020, there were 94 confirmed deaths in Simcoe County due to toxic drugs. 47 of those were in Barrie. As the pandemic continues, the drug supply becomes even more toxic. Synthetic opioids such as fentanyl and carfentanil are making their way into the drug supply and being found in all kinds of street drugs now, not just opioids. Another dangerous addition to the drug supply has been benzodiazepines, which increase the likelihood of fatal drug poisoning because when combined with fentanyl, they severely interfere with breathing, and naloxone cannot revive them. In 2020, we lost 5,000 lives in Canada due to the toxic drug crisis. My son Ryan was one of those. Since his death on November 29, 2020, I have been speaking up publicly about the need for a supervised consumption site here in Barrie. In May of 2019, our City Council voted against an SCS. We needed an SCS then, and we need it now even more than ever. People's lives are on the line. The drug supply is more unpredictable and toxic, and more people are losing their lives. Supervised consumption sites are life-saving medical facilities. They save lives. There has not been one death at a supervised consumption site worldwide. And despite all the overwhelming data that supports the health and community benefits of a supervised consumption site, Opposition to this life-saving medical facility continues today in our community. In Simcoe County, an estimated 200 lives have been lost to drug poisonings since that vote. Ryan was one of those lives lost. That is why I'm speaking up. Since I have been speaking up about the SCS, I have encountered many people that ask me, what exactly is an SCS and why do we need one? Well, an SCS, or a supervised consumption site, is a medical facility where people who use drugs can go to consume drugs that they have brought with themselves under medical supervision. There are trained staff on site that are able to assist and revive people if needed due to contaminated drugs. SCSs help to save lives and to create safer communities. SCSs are part of a harm reduction approach to a medical issue. SCSs provide overdose prevention, which includes naloxone and oxygen. They provide harm reduction supplies, including clean needles and other safe drug use equipment. They provide connection to a variety of support services, which include addiction treatment, healthcare, mental health, housing, and social supports. The benefits of supervised consumption sites include reduced rates of overdose death and hospital visits, reduced public drug use and needles discarded in the community, increase access to other services, including treatment when people are ready, reduce spread of bloodborne infections like HIV and hepatitis C, reduce stigma related to substance use. By providing a supervised consumption site in Barrie, we are showing our neighbors who use drugs that they are valued, cared for, and supported. SCSs meet people where they are at, and they help to keep them safe and alive by connecting them with supports and helping them to build trusting relationships. People cannot recover if they are dead. We need as many voices as possible speaking up in support of the importance of an SCS in downtown Barrie. You can be one of those voices and show your support by adding your company or organization logo to our website, voicesofdowntown.com, by signing and sharing our petition, and by writing to the mayor and members of a council expressing your support for the SCS. As important as SCSs are, they and other harm reduction strategies are the first aid of the drug crisis. They are us standing in the river, pulling people out to keep them from drowning. In order for us to really address the toxic drug crisis, we need to go upstream and address the root cause of this public health crisis, and that is failed laws and policies. Every drug death is a policy failure. We need to call on all levels of government to come together, as they have, to address COVID-19, to work together collaboratively. We need to call on the government for safe supply and decriminalization. We need people writing to their MPs and MPPs to call on our mayor and councillors, to call on them, to call on the health minister to declare the toxic drug crisis a public health emergency. Together, we can end stigma, change policy, and save lives. Thank you.
God, the eternal creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, mistreated, and diseased of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. And today, a light was shone on the shadows at the very heart of it. Such conditions are not God's will. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides our welfare. As we have heard, there are subtle yet powerful influences in the world that seek to divide people to accomplish their destructive aims. That which seeks to harden one human heart against another by constructing walls of fear and prejudice is not of God. Jesus Christ the embodiment of God's shalom, invites us all to draw near and receive divine peace in the midst of these difficult questions and struggles of life. You are invited to generously share this invitation of healing and reconciling that is brought about through redemptive relationships. For the restoring of persons to healthy and honest relationships with God, others, and themselves is at the heart of the purpose of our journey as a people of faith and conscience. Thank you for taking this walk together today. Know that the gift of your time and attention are deeply appreciated. May the perspectives you've heard today help inform your worldview and call you to create pathways in the world for peace, realized when embodied in communities of generosity, justice, and peacefulness, like our collective presence has been here today. Above all else, strive to be faithful to this vision and courageously challenge cultural, political, and religious trends that are contrary to the reconciling and restoring purposes of God. Pursue peace.